The people who speak the quietest often carry the truth that changes everything. Nobody inside the Sterling room believed that a 3-year-old little girl would become the one person capable of exposing a secret hidden behind polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and billion-dollar success. On the outside, everything about Daniel Hayes's life looked perfect. At 34 years old, he was one of America's youngest billionaire CEOs, the founder of Hayes Global Technologies, a company that had transformed from a college startup into one of the country's most influential technology firms. Business magazines called him a visionary. Investors admired his discipline. Employees respected his fairness. Yet the achievement Daniel valued most had nothing to do with stock prices or private jets. Several years earlier, he had purchased a struggling luxury restaurant in downtown Los Angeles called the Sterling Room, determined to preserve the jobs of dozens of hard-working employees instead of replacing them with automation. To Daniel, success was measured by the number of lives improved, not simply the size of a bank account. It was a philosophy born from hardship. He still remembered working late nights in a tiny apartment, surviving on instant noodles, while writing software that few people believed would ever matter. Those difficult years had taught him something wealth never could. Every person deserved respect regardless of their position. Unfortunately, the woman he planned to marry believed something entirely different. Victoria Lane was elegant, intelligent, and effortlessly charming whenever cameras or important guests were nearby. Charity galas loved inviting her. Fashion magazines praised her style. Social media adored every carefully curated photograph she posted beside Daniel. To the public, they looked like America's perfect power couple, preparing for a lavish wedding that would unite beauty, influence, and extraordinary wealth. Daniel genuinely believed he had found someone who shared his values. He had never imagined how carefully appearances could be manufactured. Every morning before sunrise, another woman quietly entered the Sterling Room through the employee entrance carrying a worn canvas bag over one shoulder while gently holding the tiny hand of her 3-year-old daughter. Naomi Brooks never attracted attention. She preferred it that way. As one of the restaurant's most dependable black waitresses, she memorized regular customers by name, remembered complicated orders without writing them down, and treated every guest with sincere warmth regardless of how they treated her. Her coworkers often joked that Naomi could calm even the most demanding customer simply by smiling. Few of them realized how exhausted she truly was. Raising Lily alone while working long shifts demanded every ounce of strength she possessed. Childcare did not open early enough for breakfast preparation, so Daniel had personally given Naomi permission to bring Lily during the quiet morning hours before customers arrived. The little girl usually sat at a small corner table with crayons, coloring books, and a faded stuffed rabbit that rarely left her side. Daniel occasionally stopped by before morning meetings just to wave at Lily, calling her his tiny supervisor. Lily always laughed, believing the important businessman was secretly working for her. Those innocent moments became the brightest part of Naomi's difficult mornings. She often told herself that kindness like Daniel's reminded her why she refused to lose hope. But hope can become fragile when someone quietly begins testing how much pain another person is willing to endure. Victoria had noticed long ago that Daniel respected Naomi more than most employees. He thanked her after private dinners. He remembered Lily's birthday. He even asked about Naomi's mother's health after hearing she had undergone surgery in Georgia. None of those gestures carried romantic meaning. Daniel simply believed decent people deserved to be treated with dignity. Victoria, however, saw every act of compassion as unnecessary weakness. And over the past several months, she had started proving just how different her definition of power truly was. Victoria never shouted when Daniel was nearby. She did not need to. She understood that control was far more effective when it happened quietly, hidden behind polite smiles and carefully chosen words. Whenever Daniel left for meetings or investor lunches, her entire demeanor changed. The warmth disappeared from her voice, replaced by a calm, icy tone that made every employee immediately understand she expected absolute obedience. Most of the staff simply kept their heads down. They depended on their paychecks as much as Naomi depended on hers. Speaking up against the future wife of the billionaire chief executive officer felt like risking everything. Naomi quickly learned that every morning brought a new test. Sometimes Victoria insisted the dining tables be rearranged 3 different times, even after the room looked perfect. Other days, she found invisible flaws in spotless wine glasses or demanded fresh flower arrangements because the colors suddenly no longer matched her mood. Naomi never argued. She quietly completed every request, reminding herself that each completed shift meant another day of rent paid, another week of groceries for Lily, another refill for her daughter's asthma medication. Lily noticed more than anyone realized. While coloring quietly beside the breakfast lounge, she watched her mother smile politely after every criticism, even when the comments were unfair. Children could not always understand complicated conversations, but they understood kindness and they recognized cruelty. Whenever Victoria entered the room, Lily instinctively moved closer to Naomi, wrapping one tiny hand around her mother's apron as though she believed her small presence could somehow offer protection. One morning, Daniel arrived unexpectedly before sunrise after his flight home landed several hours early. He walked through the nearly empty restaurant carrying fresh pastries from a bakery he often visited after business trips. As soon as Lily spotted him, her entire face lit up. She ran toward him holding her stuffed rabbit, while Daniel laughed and knelt to her height. He handed her a chocolate croissant almost as large as her little hands. Naomi smiled with genuine gratitude. Moments like these reminded her that not everyone with power forgot how to treat people with respect. Victoria appeared only seconds later. Her smile toward Daniel looked effortless, but Naomi noticed how quickly her eyes hardened after Daniel turned away to answer a telephone call. Victoria glanced toward the pastry in Lily's hands before quietly saying, "Children become spoiled when they receive attention they did not earn." Naomi gently replied, "She was only excited to see him, ma'am." Victoria stepped closer until only Naomi could hear her voice. "Remember your place. Daniel is being generous because he feels responsible for everyone. Do not mistake kindness for friendship." Naomi lowered her eyes without responding. There was nothing she could say that would improve the situation. After Victoria walked away, Chef Marcus Reed approached while pretending to organize fresh ingredients near the kitchen entrance. In a low voice, he asked, "Has she been talking to you like this often?" Naomi hesitated before answering. "It is nothing I cannot handle." Marcus slowly shook his head. "No, Naomi. It stopped being nothing a long time ago." She forced a reassuring smile, although both of them understood the truth. Leaving the restaurant was not an option. Starting over somewhere else meant risking Lily's health insurance, losing steady income, and abandoning the one stable environment they still had. So Naomi continued doing what she had done for months. She worked harder, spoke less, and hoped tomorrow might somehow be different. Unfortunately, Victoria interpreted silence as permission. Every day, she became a little bolder, a little more confident that nobody would ever question her behavior. She believed Daniel was too occupied building a global company to notice the quiet fear slowly spreading through the very restaurant he had worked so hard to protect. She had absolutely no idea that the smallest person in the building had been watching every single moment with innocent eyes that never forgot what they had seen. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere inside the Sterling room slowly changed in ways Daniel could sense but could not yet explain. The restaurant still earned glowing reviews. Private dining rooms remained fully booked months in advance. Investors praised the flawless service, and returning guests complimented the professionalism of every employee. Yet something invisible had disappeared. The easy laughter that once echoed through the kitchen before opening hours had faded. Conversations stopped whenever Victoria entered. Employees smiled less, spoke more carefully, and watched one another with quiet concern. Daniel noticed the difference without understanding its source. He asked Chef Marcus during a menu tasting whether the staff seemed unusually tired lately. Marcus paused for only a second before replying, "Everyone has been working hard preparing for wedding events." It was technically true, but it was not the whole truth. Marcus had considered telling Daniel everything more than once. Each time, he remembered the fear on Naomi's face whenever Victoria walked by. He knew that exposing the situation without proof could cost Naomi her livelihood if Daniel refused to believe it. So he waited, hoping the right opportunity would eventually appear. Naomi continued documenting everything in a small notebook she kept inside her locker. Every unfair assignment, every insulting remark, Every morning, Victoria intentionally changed instructions after work had already been completed. The notebook became less about proving anything and more about reminding herself that these events were real. When someone experienced constant criticism, it became frighteningly easy to question their own memory. Naomi refused to let that happen. One afternoon, while preparing a private dining room for an important business luncheon, she accidentally overheard part of a telephone conversation. Victoria stood only a few feet away near the entrance, assuming no employees were close enough to hear. "Daniel still trusts everyone," Victoria said with a quiet laugh. "He actually believes loyalty cannot be bought. After the wedding, things will change. I will make sure this restaurant operates the way successful businesses should. Sentiment has no place in leadership." Naomi froze while folding linen napkins. The words settled heavily in her mind. Victoria was not simply planning a wedding. She was already imagining complete control over every person working under Daniel's company. A few minutes later, Lily walked over carrying a drawing she had proudly finished. It showed Naomi holding her hand beneath a bright yellow sun. Daniel happened to enter through the side hallway at that exact moment and smiled when Lily offered him the picture. "Is this me?" he asked, pointing toward a tall figure standing beside them in the drawing. Lily nodded enthusiastically. "You make Mommy smile." Daniel chuckled warmly before carefully folding the picture and placing it inside his jacket pocket. "Then I am keeping this forever." Naomi thanked him, embarrassed but grateful. Victoria watched the entire exchange from across the room. Her expression remained pleasant until Daniel stepped away to greet arriving guests. The instant he disappeared through the doorway, her smile vanished. She walked slowly toward Naomi and spoke just loudly enough for only the two women to hear. "Do not encourage that child to become attached to him." Naomi looked confused. "She simply likes him because he has always been kind to us." Victoria answered with a cold smile that never reached her eyes. "Kindness creates unrealistic expectations. People like you should remember where professional boundaries belong." Naomi quietly nodded again, but inside she felt something shift. For the first time, she realized Victoria was no longer only trying to control her work. She wanted to control every human connection Naomi and Lily had inside the restaurant. That realization frightened her more than any harsh words ever had. Across the dining room, Lily looked up from her coloring book and watched Victoria's face carefully. She did not understand complicated motives or hidden ambitions, but she recognized one simple truth. Whenever the elegant lady smiled without kindness, something sad always happened afterward. The wedding was now less than 3 weeks away, and preparations had transformed the Sterling Room into a constant parade of florists, event planners, photographers, and luxury vendors. Every corner of the restaurant reflected elegance, but beneath the polished appearance, tension quietly continued to grow. Victoria treated every detail as though it represented her personal reputation, and whenever something failed to meet her impossible expectations, Naomi became the easiest person to blame. One rainy Tuesday morning, a shipment of imported white orchids arrived nearly 40 minutes late because of heavy traffic on the interstate. The delay had nothing to do with the restaurant staff, yet Victoria immediately searched for someone to hold responsible. She found Naomi arranging crystal water glasses inside the private ballroom. "Why are these flowers not already displayed?" Victoria demanded. Naomi calmly answered, "The delivery just arrived, ma'am. We are preparing everything now." Victoria folded her arms. Excuses always come so naturally to you. Without another word, she instructed Naomi to rearrange every centerpiece in the ballroom, even though the event designer had already approved the original layout. The task consumed nearly 2 extra hours, forcing Naomi to rush through her remaining responsibilities before the lunch service. Lily quietly colored at her usual table, occasionally glancing toward her mother with worried eyes. She no longer smiled as often during mornings at the restaurant. Even at 3 years old, she had begun anticipating the uncomfortable silence that followed Victoria wherever she walked. Later that afternoon, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly after finishing a meeting with overseas investors earlier than planned. He greeted employees by name as he often did, thanking everyone for their hard work during the demanding wedding preparations. When he reached Naomi, he noticed she looked unusually exhausted. "Have you been getting enough help?" he asked with genuine concern. Naomi hesitated for only a brief moment before forcing a reassuring smile. Everything is fine, sir. We have all been very busy. Daniel nodded, accepting the answer even though something about her expression continued bothering him. Before he could ask another question, Victoria approached carrying several wedding invitation samples. She slipped comfortably beside Daniel and redirected the conversation towards seating arrangements and guest lists. Naomi quietly returned to polishing silverware while Daniel followed Victoria toward the office. Chef Marcus watched the exchange from the kitchen entrance and sighed softly. Once again, the opportunity had slipped away. That evening, after closing, Naomi gathered Lily and prepared to leave through the employee entrance. As she reached for her coat, Dorothy, the restaurant's senior hostess who had worked with Daniel for nearly 15 years, gently touched her shoulder. I have watched a lot of people come through these doors, Dorothy said quietly. Good managers, bad managers, honest people and dishonest people. Daniel has always listened when someone truly needed him. You should not carry this burden forever. Naomi looked down at Lily, who was sleepily hugging her stuffed rabbit after a long day. If I say something without proof, I could lose everything, Naomi whispered. Dorothy nodded with understanding. Then wait until the truth finds its own moment. It always does. Naomi drove home thinking about those words. She did not know that the moment Dorothy described was already approaching faster than anyone expected. At the same time, Daniel sat alone in his office reviewing financial reports, but his attention kept drifting back to small details that refused to leave his mind. Naomi's tired smile. Lily's unusual silence. Marcus avoiding eye contact whenever Victoria entered the room. None of those observations proved anything on their own, yet together they created a quiet feeling that something inside his restaurant was no longer right. Daniel had built his entire career by trusting instincts that others ignored. For the first time since becoming engaged, those same instincts began whispering that the greatest threat to everything he valued might not be outside his company at all, but standing beside him every single day. The following Saturday was supposed to be simple. The Sterling Room had been closed to the public for a private wedding rehearsal luncheon, giving vendors one final opportunity to perfect every detail before the ceremony. Only a small number of employees had been scheduled to work that morning, and Naomi was among them. She arrived before 6 o'clock as usual, holding Lily's tiny hand while carrying her familiar canvas bag over one shoulder. The restaurant was unusually peaceful. Sunlight filtered through the tall front windows, reflecting across polished marble floors and perfectly arranged dining tables. For a brief moment, Naomi allowed herself to believe the morning might pass without incident. Daniel had informed everyone that he would arrive later after meeting with architects at a new corporate headquarters under construction downtown. Victoria, however, appeared much earlier than expected. She entered wearing a tailored white suit, carrying a thick folder filled with wedding schedules, vendor contracts, and seating charts. Her expression revealed immediate frustration before she even spoke. One florist had canceled at the last minute because of a family emergency. A luxury bakery had called requesting an adjustment to the delivery time. Several guests had changed their travel plans overnight. None of those problems involved Naomi, but Victoria's patience had already disappeared. Throughout the morning, she criticized nearly every small detail she encountered. A chair was slightly out of alignment. A menu card needed to be moved half an inch. A tablecloth contained a wrinkle visible only after careful inspection. Naomi quietly corrected each issue without complaint while Lily remained seated nearby drawing colorful pictures of flowers and smiling faces. Around 10 o'clock, Daniel called Victoria to confirm he would arrive shortly after 11. His voice sounded cheerful over the speakerphone. He thanked everyone for helping prepare such an important day and promised to bring coffee for the staff on his way. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes, yet it completely transformed Victoria's behavior. The warm, affectionate tone she had used while speaking with Daniel vanished the instant the call ended. She placed her phone onto a nearby table and slowly looked around the nearly empty dining room. Only Naomi and Lily remained inside, while the rest of the employees worked in the kitchen or storage areas. Victoria walked toward the long private banquet table where Naomi carefully arranged polished silverware for the final inspection. She picked up one dinner fork and held it beneath the overhead lights. "Do you honestly believe this is acceptable?" she asked calmly. Naomi examined the fork. It looked spotless. "If you see something that needs attention, I will polish it again, she answered respectfully. Victoria placed the fork back onto the table with a quiet click. That is your problem. You never see excellence. You only see what is good enough. Naomi silently reached for a polishing cloth. She had learned long ago that arguing never improved anything. While she worked, Lily glanced up from her coloring book and watched the two women carefully. Victoria continued speaking in the same controlled voice. In a few weeks, this restaurant will finally have proper leadership. Things will become much more disciplined around here. Employees who cannot meet my standards will not remain employed. Naomi kept polishing the silverware without lifting her eyes. Inside, her heart beat faster. She remembered the notebook inside her locker filled with weeks of careful observations. She remembered Dorothy's advice to wait until the truth found its own moment. She remembered Marcus' warning that silence could not protect her forever. Most of all, she looked toward Lily, who offered her a small, encouraging smile from across the room, without fully understanding why her mother suddenly looked so worried. Outside the restaurant, Daniel's car turned off the main boulevard and entered the private parking area several minutes earlier than anyone expected, carrying fresh coffee for the staff and completely unaware that the next few moments would change the lives of everyone inside the Sterling room forever. Victoria slowly lifted the polished dinner fork again, turning it beneath the chandelier, as though searching for an invisible flaw. The dining room remained perfectly quiet except for the faint sound of air conditioning and the soft scratching of Lily's crayons against paper. Naomi waited respectfully with the polishing cloth folded neatly in her hands. She had learned that speaking too quickly only prolonged these uncomfortable moments. After several long seconds, Victoria finally sighed. I expected better. Naomi answered calmly. I can polish every piece again if you would like. Victoria smiled without warmth. That answer is becoming predictable. She deliberately selected another fork, then another, placing each one onto the white tablecloth as though building evidence for a mistake that did not exist. Do you know why people like you never move forward? She asked quietly. Naomi remained silent. Because you settle for average and hope kindness will make up the difference. Naomi took a slow breath before replying. I simply try to do my best every day, ma'am. Victoria gave a short laugh. Your best would never survive in my world. Across the room, Lily looked up from her drawing. She did not understand every sentence, but she recognized the familiar sadness in her mother's eyes. The little girl quietly stood, picked up her stuffed rabbit, and walked toward Naomi until she was standing beside her apron. Naomi gently rested one hand on Lily's shoulder without taking her eyes away from Victoria. Your daughter watches everything, Victoria observed. She should probably learn early that life is not fair. Naomi finally looked directly at her. There was no anger in her voice, only quiet conviction. I hope she learns that people should treat each other with respect. For the briefest moment, Victoria's expression hardened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Respect is earned through status, influence, and success, not through carrying plates. Naomi answered softly. I believe character matters more than position. Those simple words seemed to irritate Victoria far more than any argument could have. Before she could respond, a member of the event planning team entered carrying fabric samples and asked Victoria to approve several table decorations. Victoria forced an elegant smile and immediately transformed back into the charming future bride everyone expected to see. She praised the arrangements, complimented the designer, and laughed pleasantly as though the previous conversation had never happened. Naomi watched the performance in silence. The sudden change was so effortless that it almost felt unreal. Lily tugged gently on her mother's sleeve and whispered, Mommy, why lady nice now? Naomi knelt beside her daughter and brushed a curl away from her forehead. Sometimes people act differently around different people, she said carefully. Lily frowned as though trying to solve a difficult puzzle. But Daddy Daniel nice all time. Naomi smiled sadly. Yes, sweetheart. He is. Several minutes later the event planner left, and Victoria checked the time on her watch. Daniel had texted that he was only a few minutes away. She immediately adjusted her jacket, fixed her hair in the reflection of a nearby window, and practiced another welcoming smile. Naomi quietly returned to arranging the final place settings while Lily resumed coloring. Outside, Daniel parked his car and gathered 2 trays of fresh coffee along with a bakery box filled with warm pastries for the staff. As he walked toward the employee entrance, he noticed through the dining room windows that only 3 people remained inside. Victoria stood near the center table. Naomi worked quietly beside her. Little Lily colored peacefully just a few feet away. Everything appeared perfectly normal from the outside. Yet before Daniel could reach the front door, Victoria slowly reached for a crystal pitcher filled with ice water that had been prepared for the afternoon tasting. She wrapped her fingers around the handle while staring silently at Naomi. And in that single unexpected moment, the future she had carefully planned for years stood only seconds away from collapsing forever. Victoria held the crystal pitcher for a long moment, her expression perfectly calm, as though she had already decided how the next few seconds would unfold. Naomi noticed the movement from the corner of her eye, but kept arranging the final place setting. She had spent months avoiding confrontation, believing silence was the safest choice. She had no reason to expect today would be any different. Lily looked up from her drawing and hugged her stuffed rabbit against her chest. Something about the room suddenly felt different. Children often sensed tension long before adults admitted it existed. Victoria stepped closer to the table and spoke in an almost conversational tone. "You know what disappoints me most, Naomi?" Naomi answered respectfully, "No, ma'am." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "You still believe people eventually receive what they deserve?" Naomi paused before quietly replying, "I believe people remember how they are treated." Victoria smiled. "That is a very comforting story." Without another word, she slowly tipped the crystal pitcher forward. A stream of cold water poured over Naomi's shoulder, soaking her neatly pressed white shirt, black vest, and apron. The polished silverware reflected tiny drops as they scattered across the white tablecloth and marble floor. Naomi gasped in surprise, instinctively stepping backward. She did not shout. She did not react with anger. She simply stood there, stunned, trying to understand what had just happened. Lily dropped her crayons. "Mommy!" she cried as she ran toward Naomi with tears already filling her eyes. Victoria calmly placed the empty pitcher back onto the table. "Perhaps now you will pay closer attention to your work," she said coolly. Naomi wrapped one arm around Lily, gently reassuring the frightened little girl even though her own hands were trembling. Before she could respond, the front entrance opened. Daniel walked inside carrying 2 cardboard trays of coffee and a bakery box balanced carefully in his arms. He had been smiling only seconds earlier, already imagining the surprised reactions from the staff. The smile disappeared immediately. He stopped walking. The coffee trays remained frozen in his hands as he looked across the dining room. Naomi stood completely soaked beside the banquet table. Lily clung tightly to her mother's waist, crying openly. Water still dripped onto the polished floor beneath them. Victoria stood only a few feet away beside the empty crystal pitcher. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Daniel slowly placed the coffee and pastries onto the nearest service counter without taking his eyes off the scene before him. His voice remained remarkably calm, but every word carried unusual weight. "Victoria," he said quietly, "can you explain what happened here?" Victoria recovered almost instantly. Her face softened into practiced concern as she gestured toward the table. "Daniel, it was simply an accident." Naomi reached for the silverware at the same moment I picked up the pitcher. "I lost my grip." Daniel looked from the empty pitcher to Naomi's soaked uniform. Naomi lowered her eyes. She had become so accustomed to protecting herself through silence that the words refused to come. Then a tiny voice broke through the heavy stillness. Lily stepped away from her mother, looked directly at Daniel, and shook her head with surprising determination. "No," she said between tears. Daniel slowly knelt until he was at eye level with her. "Sweetheart," he asked gently, "what do you mean?" Lily pointed toward Victoria with one small finger. "Lady, do it." Daniel remained silent, allowing her to continue. Lily wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her little sweater. "Lady mean to Mommy every day. Lady make Mommy sad. Lady say bad things. Mommy say nothing because Mommy need work." Every simple sentence landed with unmistakable clarity. Daniel felt his heartbeat quicken. He looked toward Naomi, whose eyes had already filled with tears she had struggled for months to hide. Then he turned back toward Victoria. For the first time since they had met, he was no longer looking at the woman he intended to marry. He was looking at someone he suddenly realized he might never have truly known at all. Victoria forced a nervous laugh, but the confidence that had always protected her was beginning to crack. "Daniel," She is only 3 years old, she said gently. She is confused. Children misunderstand situations all the time. Daniel did not immediately answer. He remained kneeling beside Lily, looking into the little girl's tear-filled eyes. During the past year, he had watched her celebrate birthdays, laugh over coloring books, proudly show him every drawing she finished, and innocently tell stories about butterflies, puppies, and playground adventures. She had never once exaggerated to impress anyone. She had never shown the slightest interest in manipulating adults. Everything about her was simple, honest, and wonderfully transparent. Daniel softly asked, "Lily, sweetheart, can you tell me what happened?" Lily nodded several times. "Lady, pour water on Mommy." Daniel continued gently, "Did this happen before today?" Lily hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter before whispering, "Lady, make Mommy cry lots." The restaurant seemed unusually quiet. Even the distant sounds from the kitchen had disappeared as several employees slowly gathered near the hallway after hearing Lily's crying. Chef Marcus stepped into the dining room first, followed by Dorothy and 2 members of the event planning staff. No one interrupted. Everyone simply looked between Daniel, Naomi, and Victoria. Naomi stood completely still, her soaked uniform clinging uncomfortably beneath her apron. She desperately wanted to protect Lily from the growing tension, yet she also knew something irreversible had already begun. Daniel slowly stood and removed his suit jacket without saying a word. He gently placed it across Naomi's shoulders to help keep her warm. Naomi looked at him with complete surprise. "Mr. Hayes, you do not have to," Daniel quietly interrupted. "Please." His voice remained calm, but the kindness inside it made Naomi's composure begin to crumble. She lowered her eyes, fighting back tears she had hidden for months. Daniel turned toward Victoria again. "I am going to ask you one question, and I need an honest answer." Victoria immediately nodded. "Of course. Has this been happening before today?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Absolutely not. She has always been overly sensitive. I simply expect professional standards." Before Daniel could respond, Lily tugged gently on his hand. He looked down. "Mommy arm," Lily whispered. "Lady, grab Mommy arm before." Daniel frowned slightly. A memory suddenly returned with startling clarity. Several weeks earlier, Lily had pointed toward a faint mark on Naomi's wrist while he was leaving after dinner service. Naomi had smiled awkwardly and explained she had bumped into a serving cart. At the time, he had accepted the explanation because it seemed easier than questioning someone he loved. Now that memory no longer felt harmless. Daniel looked toward Naomi's sleeve. "Naomi," he said softly, "would you please roll up your sleeve?" Naomi hesitated. Fear and embarrassment battled across her face. For months, she had carefully hidden every reminder of difficult days because exposing them felt more frightening than enduring them. Daniel gently added, "You are not in trouble. Please trust me." Slowly, Naomi folded back the fabric covering her forearm. Several faded marks remained visible, already beginning to heal, but still unmistakable. The dining room fell completely silent. Daniel stared at them without speaking. He recognized one of those marks immediately. It was the same place Lily had innocently pointed to weeks before. His chest tightened with regret. He had seen the evidence with his own eyes and had chosen the explanation that required the least discomfort. Victoria quickly stepped forward. "Daniel, those could have happened anywhere. You cannot possibly assume." Daniel raised one hand, stopping her before she could finish. His expression had changed completely. The warmth that normally defined him had been replaced by quiet disappointment. For the first time since their engagement, he realized that the person asking him to ignore what he could plainly see was not the frightened employee standing before him, but the woman who had promised to build a future beside him. And deep inside, another realization was beginning to take shape. If Lily had spoken the truth today, then perhaps every uneasy feeling he had dismissed over the past several months had been trying to tell him the very same story. Daniel slowly lowered Naomi's sleeve with the same care someone might use when handling something unexpectedly fragile. He remained silent for several long seconds, giving himself time to separate emotion from judgment. Throughout his career as a billionaire chief executive officer, he had built companies by relying on evidence instead of assumptions. Today would be no different. Yet this was not a boardroom disagreement or a financial negotiation. This was happening inside a restaurant that carried his name, involving people he believed he knew better than anyone. He looked toward Victoria, whose confident posture had begun to fade. You told me those marks could have happened anywhere, Daniel said quietly. Then explain why Lily recognized them before I even asked about them. Victoria crossed her arms defensively. Because Naomi has obviously been discussing adult problems in front of her child. Naomi immediately shook her head. I have never spoken badly about anyone to Lily. Her voice remained soft, but for the first time it carried quiet certainty instead of fear. Lily looked up at Daniel again. Mommy say be nice, she whispered. Mommy never say bad. Those simple words struck Daniel harder than any accusation could have. He believed children reflected the values they experienced at home, and everything Lily had ever shown him pointed toward honesty, kindness, and innocence. Chef Marcus finally stepped forward after months of silence. Mr. Hayes, he said carefully, I know this is difficult, but there is something you deserve to know. Daniel turned toward him. Marcus hesitated only briefly before continuing. Several of us have noticed changes for a long time. We stayed quiet because we were afraid speaking without proof would only make Naomi's situation worse. Dorothy slowly nodded in agreement. I have worked beside you for 15 years, she added. I have never questioned your character. We questioned whether anyone would believe what we had seen without undeniable evidence. Daniel looked around the dining room. Every employee standing there avoided celebrating what was happening. No one appeared satisfied. Instead, they looked relieved that the truth was finally beginning to surface. That realization hurt him even more. They had trusted his kindness but doubted his awareness. Victoria quickly interrupted. So now everyone suddenly has the same story? This is ridiculous. They are protecting each other because they know I expect higher standards. Daniel did not argue. Instead, he quietly reached into his jacket pocket and removed his phone. He opened the internal security application connected to the restaurant's surveillance system, then looked back at Victoria. The Sterling room has security cameras covering every public area, he said calmly. The recordings are securely stored on encrypted company servers. I have rarely needed to review them because I trusted the people working here. Victoria's face lost what little color remained. Daniel noticed the change immediately. If today's incident was truly an accident, he continued, the cameras will confirm exactly what happened. If similar situations occurred before today, they may confirm those as well. Nobody spoke. Even Lily seemed to sense that something important had just changed. Victoria attempted one final smile, but it appeared strained and uncertain. Daniel, surely you are not going to investigate your own fiancé over a misunderstanding. Daniel met her eyes with a calm expression she had never seen before. I am not investigating my fiancé, he answered. I am protecting the people whose safety became my responsibility the day they chose to work for my company. He turned toward Marcus. Please cancel the remainder of today's rehearsal schedule and ask everyone except essential staff to go home with full pay. Marcus immediately nodded. Daniel then faced Naomi. You and Lily are leaving for the day as well. I want you both to rest. Nothing about your employment is at risk. Naomi could not find the words to answer. She simply held Lily close while tears quietly filled her eyes. As Daniel watched them walk toward the employee entrance with Dorothy beside them, he realized something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Trust was never measured by how confidently someone spoke. It was measured by whether the truth remained standing after every excuse had finally disappeared. And within the next few hours, the security cameras would reveal a truth that no carefully crafted image could ever hide again.